Okay, today we're tackling something heavy, one of the darkest chapters in modern history. But here's the thing. This isn't just about what happened in Rwanda. We're going to dive into how it happened. How does an entire nation get turned against itself? And maybe most importantly, what can we all learn from it? So, when you picture Rwanda, this is what you should see, right? A small, beautiful nation right in the heart of Africa. It's all green hills, absolutely stunning landscapes. They even call it the land of a thousand hills. But hiding just beneath all that beauty is a memory of an almost unimaginable horror. Because in 1994, this peaceful, serene place became the stage for a genocide that just exploded with a speed and a brutality that's, well, it's hard to even wrap your head around. So how is a tragedy like this even possible? To figure that out, we have to go back, way back, before all the violence, before the hatred was, well, created. We need to see what Rwanda was like for centuries. And it was pretty simple. One people living on one land. Okay, and this right here, this is probably the single most important thing to get. It completely shatters one of the biggest myths about the genocide. You see, the words Hutu and Tutsis, they weren't originally about different ethnic tribes that had always been fighting. Not at all. Think of them more like social classes, or economic groups. They were all part of the same culture, spoke the same language, had the same traditions. I mean, they lived right next to each other, they married each other, their families were all mixed together. This idea that there was some huge uncrossable divide between them, it just wasn't a thing. Before anything else, they were all simply Rwandan. So if that's true, if they were all one people, what on earth happened? The answer is a poison. A poison that was intentionally injected into their society from the outside. And that turning point? It all started when Belgian colonial rulers showed up in the early 1900s. You see, the Belgians were, well, they were obsessed with putting everyone into boxes. So they came in and forced this rigid ethnic identity system on everyone. And they used this ridiculous pseudoscience, literally measuring people's noses and skulls, to decide who was who. Then they made it official. They issued identity cards that stamped every single person as Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. And here's the kicker. They then handed all the power and all the perks to the Tutsi minority, basically creating a brand new ruling class. And just like that, they planted the seeds of a deep, deep resentment. So let's be absolutely clear about this. The hatred that eventually exploded into genocide, it wasn't some ancient feud that was bound to happen. No way. It was engineered. It was a colonial design, a textbook case of divide and rule that poisoned an entire society. And for decades, that engineered resentment just simmered. It was always there right below the surface. After Rwanda got its independence from Belgium, the tables turned. Power flipped to the Hutu majority, and now the Tutsi minorities started facing persecution. The whole nation basically became a tinderbox, just waiting for a single spark to set the whole thing ablaze. And that spark? It came on April 6, 1994. The Hutu president's plane was shot down. And the response, it wasn't chaos. It was immediate, and it was chillingly organized. I mean, within hours, Hutu extremist militias had roadblocks set up all over the country. And what were they using to pick out their targets? Those very same ID cards the Belgians had created. And just like that, the killing began. For the next 100 days, more than 800,000 people were killed. Just try to process that. That's almost 8,000 people killed every single day. For 3 months straight. Just let that number hang in the air for a second. So how? How do you get ordinary people to commit such unbelievable atrocities against their own neighbors? Well, you have to dehumanize them, you have to turn them into something less than human, and that's exactly what happened. Radio stations controlled by extremists just blasted out hate propaganda 24/7, and they used one word over and over again to describe Tutsis, inyenzi. It's the Kinyarwanda word for cockroaches, pests, something you need to stamp out. And this wasn't some faraway war fought with bombs and tanks. No, this was up close, it was personal, and it was brutal. The main weapon used? A machete. Think about that. Neighbors were killing neighbors they grew up with. Husbands were forced to kill their own Tutsi wives. Even churches, places that are supposed to be safe havens, they became slaughterhouses.
And this might be the most chilling part of the entire story. Yeah, soldiers and militias got it all started. They organized it. But the vast majority of the actual killing, it was done by ordinary people. Your neighbor, the farmer down the road, the local teacher, even doctors. Just normal people, swept up in this insane wave of manufactured hate. So as all of this horror is unfolding day after day, there's one giant question that just hangs over everything. Where was the rest of the world?
And the answer, sadly, is that the failure of the international community was absolute, total. The UN had a small group of peacekeepers there, but they were basically told to stand down. Their hands were tied. And the big world powers, they knew. They knew exactly what was happening, but they made a deliberate choice not to step in. They even actively avoided using the word genocide. Why? Because if they had said that word, international law would have forced them to do something. So they just didn't say it.
Eventually, the genocide was stopped. A Tutsi-led rebel army, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, managed to take control of the country. But what was left? Just a completely broken nation. You had survivors living right next door to the people who had killed their families. How in the world do you even start to rebuild a country from that kind of ash? And that's not some abstract, philosophical question. For millions of Rwandans, it was their agonizing, day-to-day reality. The entire country faced this impossible challenge. How do you get justice, but also just survive as a nation? I mean, you had hundreds of thousands of perpetrators. The normal court system couldn't possibly handle that. So Rwanda did something amazing. They brought back an old traditional justice system called gacaca. Basically, whole villages would gather together. The people who had committed crimes were pushed to confess right there in public. And the survivors, they got to confront them face to face. It was messy, it was painful, it was far from perfect, but it was what the nation had to do to even begin to face what had happened. And here's the real takeaway from what happened after the genocide. For Rwanda to even have a future, reconciliation couldn't just be some nice idea. It had to be a national strategy. Forgiveness wasn't about a warm, fuzzy feeling. It was a practical choice, a tool that was absolutely necessary for the country to survive. When you look at the whole story of Rwanda, it's just this devastating warning to all of us. It teaches us that genocide doesn't start with guns and machetes, it starts with words. It starts with the language of division, the moment we start turning our neighbors into others. And maybe the most terrifying lesson of all, it shows us that one of the deadliest ingredients is simply silence. The silence of all the people who could have spoken up and should have, but didn't.